You are listening to From Embers, a weekly show on CFRC 101.9 FM about anarchist and anti-authoritarian ideas and practice. We are broadcasting from the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples on land that has come to be called Kingston, Ontario, Canada because of the thievery and brutality of the Canadian state and its empire-loving parents. From Embers is about fires, some real and some metaphorical. Fires started generations ago and tended to over the years. Little sparks all across this territory that we hope will grow, spread, and engulf the thieving state called Canada and the capitalist system that has plagued this land since the fur trade.
On this episode of From Embers, we return to the rising wave of renter struggles across the province of Ontario. On May 1st, 2018, tenants in the Stoney Creek Towers in East Hamilton declared a rent strike, demanding that their corporate landlord drop an above-guideline rent increase of almost 10% over 3 years, and that the property managers perform numerous needed overdue repairs to their units. I first interviewed Jason of the Hamilton Tenants Solidarity Network back in mid-May. The HTSN helped initiate the rent strike and works to support tenant self-organization and struggle across the city of Hamilton, and increasingly in coordination with like-minded groups across Ontario. In that interview, we discussed the origins and goals of the HTSN, the role tenant organizations can play in a broader anti-capitalist movement, and how the organizing efforts at Stoney Creek eventually escalated to the rent strike. That interview was aired on CFRC radio back in May, but was not published through our podcast channel until this week. If you'd like to hear it, you can stream or download it at fromembers.libsyn.com. Tonight we feature a follow-up interview with Jason about the East Hamilton rent strike as it enters its 5th month. We discuss the potential impact of the provincial election last June, the escalating tactics to put pressure on building owners, investors, and property managers, disruptions of the landlord-tenant board, and an epic road trip to Ottawa to confront the individuals most directly responsible for displacing the tenants at Stoney Creek. Which makes a good segue into our second segment tonight, an interview with a tenant organizer in the neighbourhood of Herongate in Ottawa, where another massive real estate company is attempting to conduct the largest urban eviction campaign in Canada, after having bought up a literal quarter of the neighbourhood. But the residents of Herongate aren't going to leave without a fight. So stay tuned for 2 important and developing efforts by tenants and their accomplices to resist displacement in Ontario. We begin with our interview with Jason of the Hamilton Tenants Solidarity Network. So I guess we left off when we last spoke in mid-May with hoping to double the number of tenants who went on strike come June 1st. So how did things go in building up to a renewed push for June 1st?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say, we didn't quite double. We did get more people on board. So, we were well over 100 units on strike for June 1st. We'd gone into May with about 75 units on rent strike. We got that to probably about 110, 120 units maybe. Unfortunately, what we ended up doing in June was we also realized, we needed to really start upping the pressure. So we put a lot of energy into starting and coordinating action. And so For at least for June, we didn't have as good of a number or good of a handle on the numbers as we maybe should have. That's something we've rectified since then, but yeah, that's basically what happened in June.
How many units are on strike right now?
I mean, again, we've had the number of people have fluctuated. I mean, this is a long strike, so it's hard to keep momentum up. We got a whole bunch of new people on rent strike for the beginning of August. We were again back up over 100 units. I mean, some people have had court. They've been forced by the landlord and tenant board to pay their rent under threat of eviction. So I think we're probably down to about maybe 80 units right now. But it's something, yeah, we're working on getting back up again. So it's a constant struggle. I mean, and that's the thing with these really long strikes. It becomes part of it is just to sort of keep up momentum.
And we also had a provincial election here in Ontario, June 9th, I think was the date, and an election of a right-wing Conservative government, Doug Ford. Do you expect that will change the context at all for, maybe not for this rent strike, but for tactics and strategies moving forward?
I think that, I mean, there are some groups that are already sounding the trumpet over Doug Ford. OCAP has been raising the call. I think there's a lot of unions that are starting to gather their forces. But yeah, it's going to be brutal. Yeah, I mean, Doug Ford is a no-nonsense, brutal right-wing populist. And some of the stuff that he's promised to do with regards to the issues of facing tenants are scary. So yeah, we're looking at the possibility that Doug Ford might just scrap rent control altogether. He's certainly, I mean, Doug Ford is somebody who made his family made their money from the construction business, right? So he's, that's where he comes from. I mean, it's pretty obvious where his class loyalties are going to lie when it comes down to this. So yeah, I mean, we're entering a period of increased repression and austerity for renters, which is going to just make the situation that working class people are facing like that much worse. So we're looking at it both, trying to brace ourselves for some of the stuff that's going to come down, but also looking at it as an opportunity to sort of gather the forces of people who are being pushed to the point where, they decide that enough's enough and they have to fight.
Could you outline some of the tactics and events that you've had or used since May to spread and escalate the rent strike? So, for example, the open house, demonstrations you've had, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, the rent strike's been going on for a while now, and it feels like, we've done everything we could to bring CLV to the table. But, I mean, yeah, some of those things obviously, one of the things that doesn't get reported on and stuff like that, I mean, we are having a ton of meetings, obviously. So lots of meetings. We've started having weekly lobby meetings. And then in terms of some of the actions, I mean, we've done phone zaps. We've had at least 2 demonstrations where we've went and crashed the landlord and tenant board. We researched their investors. We went to the head office of one of the CLV's main investors, CI Financial, on Bay Street in Toronto. We've sort of targeted their social media. We more recently actually planned a trip down to Ottawa, where we went to their head office and paid a visit to the CEO's home. We've had other actions where we've coordinated multi-city actions targeting different regional offices. We've had We've regularly disrupted their open houses if they're trying to rent out the empty units to new tenants. So, I mean, there's been a high level of pressure put on them. And I mean, then beyond that, we've also been doing all sorts of fundraising events. One of our members, Lee Reed, is a hip hop artist, put out an album called the Steel City EP, entirely about gentrification in Hamilton. And all the proceeds of that are going towards the Rent Strike Defense Fund. Even just last night, there was a show in Hamilton. We've had a couple of those. So I mean, it's been an all-consuming thing for the last several months, and I mean, there's still more to come.
Are you finding that the pressure that you're applying to CLV and to InterRent is having an effect?
I mean, it certainly is having an effect. CLV and InterRent are pretty good at hiding their wounds, I would say. They're pretty careful about like the way that this is being framed, and they seem to be pretty determined from almost like an ideological perspective to not give in to the rent strike. So, but no, I mean, yeah, I definitely, I know that we're getting to them. I mean, we've heard rumors and stuff like that. We had the property manager at one of the buildings came to one of the strike captain's apartments drunk one night and was trying to talk shit about how they were going to beat the rent strike and stuff. But I mean, he's with other tenants. I mean, he's terrified. He lives in constant fear that he's either going to be called by tenants or by his boss about this and that. So yeah, I mean, we know that this is causing some serious issues. But I mean, yeah, up till this point, they've still steadfastly refused to negotiate. So that's what we want to get them to do.
Do you think that InterRent is discussing this with other large real estate investment trusts, given that there have been strikes in Parkdale? There's this strike. There's potential strike in Ottawa down the line. There is, I think, a new strike in Toronto, right, in Flemington Park. So do you think that there's an industry-level fear about this tactic catching on? Do you think that that's why they're holding out?
Yeah, I mean, we have confirmation from several sources that this is something that landlords are talking about and that they are very worried about. We recently heard that Everett Trust, which is the largest local landlord in Hamilton, they manage well over 100 properties in Hamilton. We heard from somebody that they've said that they're not doing above guideline increases in any of their buildings, largely because they've been watching what's been happening with CLV and they wanted to set themselves aside. We also happen to know that, I mean, people from the FRPO, which is the Federation of Rental Providers of Ontario, are paying attention to this, and yeah, I mean, they want this to end. I mean, landlords don't really like to be under the microscope. They wanted to sit back and be able to collect money for nothing. So, yeah, I mean, it definitely, they're feeling pressure from other people within the industry.
And the landlord-tenant board hearings that have happened, I understand they're being disrupted because the outcome is potentially ordering people on strike to pay their rent. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, basically. And what we've told tenants the whole time is, I mean, you don't as a tenant go and look to the landlord and tenant board for justice. The landlord and tenant board exists to uphold the status quo as it relates to laws governing landlords and tenants. And I mean, particularly, when it comes to rent strikes or above guideline increases, there's really nothing to expect from the landlord and tenant board. So, we've told people the whole time, if you withhold your rent, there's a high likelihood that the landlord is going to take you to the board and try to get you evicted. So we've incorporated that into our strategy, that kind of understanding. And I mean, true to form, I mean, that's what they've done. They've dragged people to the landlord and tenant board, tried to separate them into individual cases, and generally try to ignore the fact that there's collective organizing taking place.
And if a tenant is ordered to pay, like I understand it makes sense to do that to avoid eviction, but are they able to go back on strike afterwards?
Oh yeah, most definitely. I mean, yeah, we've had several tenants who paid their rent, and then immediately went back on rent strike, like the next month. There's also people who have strategically paid like one of the month's rent that they owe, but still are outstanding for several other months. So it's gotten pretty complicated from kind of like a spreadsheet perspective. But yeah, definitely. I mean, people, if they're ordered to pay rent by the landlord and tenant board, that does not mean that they're out of the fight.
I saw an article posted on the network's Medium page that kind of dug deeper into some of the internal documents of InterRent and called it their mass displacement strategy. Would you be able to describe a bit what you learned through looking into this company and how it markets itself to investors?
Yeah, so I mean, InterRent, which is the actual real estate investment trust that owns the buildings, is a pretty interesting case study. These real estate investment trusts have become some of the most predatory and powerful figures in the Canadian real estate market. And CLV, Mike McGaughan, InterRent play a pretty pioneering role in this process. So Mike McGaughan, who's the CEO of InterRent, who's somebody who we've targeted with some of our actions. He is somebody who rose through the ranks, so to speak. He was involved with CLV, which was property management company. It essentially got absorbed by InterRent, and Mike McGaughan was made into the CEO of InterRent. But he did that by really kind of pioneering a very hard-nosed and aggressive strategy, something that they call repositioning. So essentially, they helped bring this up to a science where, these big real estate investment trusts will just buy a building that they get for cheap because it's a fixer-upper. And it's identified as like a potentially a neighborhood that has potential for gentrification. And then they go ahead and evict people if they can, or just price them out. They bother people into leaving through regular water shutoffs, shutting down the elevators and stuff like that. All these things are really kind of chip away and try to get people to leave. And I mean, this is all very well outlined in their internal reports to their investors, their shareholders. So, it's a strategy that they call repositioning, and it's something that's been taken up by these real estate investment trusts all over Canada. And in other parts of the world in different forms. But yeah, so I mean, InterRent is a big player, even though there are bigger real estate investment trusts. InterRent and CLV are big players in terms of the strategy involved. And I mean, it's important to understand. I mean, what these real estate investment trusts is essentially, financialized landlords. So the way that real estate investment trusts are structured, they're essentially like a mutual fund, except instead of being based on stock investments or whatever, they're based on real estate. But yeah, I mean, they're essentially just vehicles for capital from within Canada and also just around the world from banks, and like we've looked at some of who the investors are in InterRent. I mean, they're big institutional investors. Ontario Power is an investor. There are a variety of banks, hedge funds, stuff like that. So, I mean, when we're coming up against a company like InterRent, you're really coming up against capitalism. you're coming up against banks that are invested in the Canadian real estate market because they see that as a profitable investment, and they're pretty ruthless about securing their investments.
Have you had any success with targeting investors and trying to get them to divest from InterRent?
I mean, we surprised their main investor, CI Financial. CI Financial is the second largest investment management corporation in Canada. They handle, I think, something like $180 billion worth of investments. So, I mean, for them, like, they're the largest investor in InterRent, but for them, it's also kind of small potatoes. So when we found out they were the main investor, we went and we had an action in Toronto. It was pretty well planned, I would say. I mean, we did like a distraction rally outside. We snuck some people in who were all dressed up in their Sunday best. Got them up. We managed to have an impromptu interview. We did a phone zap at the same time, so they were all disoriented at the office, didn't know what was going on. We managed to have an impromptu interview with the CEO and the president of the company, and then also a longer hour-long discussion with their vice president of legal. They ended up promising us that they would look into their investment in InterRent. They sent us a pretty, a letter that is basically something like we expected. They said they looked into it and everything that InterRent is doing seems legal, and they think that, it's a sound investment, yada yada. But so no, I mean, we unfortunately haven't been able to find any investors that we thought were prone to, having playing on either their conscience or their public image. We're dealing again with like people who are just money-making machines, banks, hedge funds, things like that. So they're impervious to what people think about them.
Yeah, I mean, it seems in a way that InterRent is not particularly exceptional in how it's operating. It's not an egregious kind of flashpoint. It's the mundane exploitation and oppression of capitalism that they're just kind of playing their part in.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, pretty much. I mean, we've dealt with other landlords that are more egregious in their tactics. I mean, InterRent they've been pretty careful and kind of by the book. Their main thing is that, they've helped to develop this policy of what they call repositioning, which is, it's something that has become very commonplace amongst other big corporate landlords. But no, I mean, I would agree. They're not flashy. They're just trying to keep their head down and keep making tons of cash.
I like how you have been able to put faces to this on both sides of it. So in terms of naming this Mike McGann figure and sort of personalizing his role in it, and also bringing forth the voices of tenants, and when doing actions, kind of forcing CLV and InterRent employees to look in the faces of the people that they're displacing. That seems like a powerful tactic, and also a way to bring sort of human experience into something that is so amorphous and decentralized as financial corporate capitalism tends to be. Yeah,
I mean, we've been looking at the corporate structure of InterRent, CLV. We've gotten to almost know some of these actors a little bit, even though we haven't been able to actually communicate with them directly, just, because we've done so much research on them. I mean, in terms of the tenants, I mean, we love doing this because we love all these people that are on rent strike and that are fighting back. I mean, we've met so many amazing people who have really incredible stories. Like a lot of people, like anarchists and other leftists. I mean, they sort of talk about working class or whatever as though it's like this passive kind of block or whatever that's just sort of looking for guidance and stuff, which, I mean, there's people do, need to be in contact with revolutionary organizers, but you actually get to start to talk to these people and you hear some of their stories, like the stuff that they've lived through, the stuff that they've participated in other countries before they moved to Canada. And I mean, just, the everyday things that working class people face, they're just, it's been incredibly validating. And yeah, I mean, it just reinforced this idea that anarchists and other people on the left need to look towards everyday people and reorient our politics around the struggles that they want to engage in, and help bring these people into direct conflict with capital and with the state, through basing our actions in their material struggles. We've heard some stories from some of these people that are remarkable. People talking about, defending their neighbors during like religious pogroms, ethnic cleansing, people who've escaped like genocide and lived in refugee camps and stuff like that. Like, these are people who are very strong, and very, very determined. It's just a matter of actually kind of, turning them on, and towards, to like the, to a struggle and kind of activating all of this brilliance that otherwise just sort of lies, separated in everyday, people's lives. So.
Could you tell the story of the trip to Ottawa that you recently did and the role of coordination with other cities that's played in this campaign?
Yeah, so earlier this month, we one of our buddies is a school bus driver, as his job. So we got him to drive a school bus down to Ottawa. We packed that full of tenants. We ended up staying over in the city, and we basically decided we wanted to go and bring this fight to CLV's doorstep. They've been pretty easy for them to ignore it up to that point, just kind of bury their head in the sand. So we decided we were going to bring the fight to them. We went to their corporate head office on Bank Street in Ottawa. They, were surprised, but when they saw us coming, they dispatched their security to just run down the stairs and lock us out. And it was pretty remarkable. They just cowered in their office. They turned off the lights and tried to make it seem like they weren't there. They called the cops on us. The cops came, and like, even the cops were just kind of like, we explained to them, it was like, yeah, we came here from Hamilton. We just want to deliver a letter to these people, and they just locked us out of the building, and this is their landlord or whatever. And the cops were kind of just like, well, these guys are p***s. It was weird. The cops were, they didn't really give us a hard time. And I mean, they let the tenants like picket people as they were leaving. There was, a fair amount of contempt. Because, I mean, it's ridiculous, right? They wouldn't, all they had to do was just let people in and accept a letter, but instead they decided to lock people out. We spent about 2-3 hours out in front of their building. Everyone who was coming down the street was honking their horns at us. Huge amount of support from people. CLV, people came there who CLV owed money, like contractors and stuff like that, and they wouldn't let them in because they were scared that we would get in to the building and stuff. And so we ended up picketing them. Really gave them a hard time. Everyone that was leaving, they were told that they were scum and, encouraged, we had a megaphone, we were telling them to look the tenants in the eyes, the people that they were displacing, these little old Cambodian ladies and children and stuff like that, and just letting them know that we think that they're complete garbage and what they do is not okay. It's not just a job; it's like the scum. So they were all pretty shook leaving the building. I think that probably the following morning there would have had to have been one hell of a pizza party or Sunday bar or whatever to try to keep employee morale up. And then, the next day we actually went to Mike McGaughan's personal home. He lives in this mansion in a suburb called Manotick, a suburb south of Ottawa. And when we rolled up there, he'd already called the cops. There was cops everywhere. which was pretty illustrative for the tenants involved, about how the way the cops protect rich people in a way that, these people would never be able to, if they were saying that somebody was about to show up and knock on their door, there's, they're not going to get 6 cruisers to protect them and stuff like that. So it just shows the way that the cops favor rich people. So yeah, we rolled up to his house. His main mansion, we knew that he had 2 mansions in the same vicinity, and so we decided to go to the bigger of the 2. It's this $2.5 million home. There's a YouTube video from when the real estate agents were selling it. He's got a, quote, award-winning pool, whatever the fuck that means. He's got like an indoor jacuzzi, all the bells and whistles. So we figured that he'd be there. We went to the house. It was under construction. They were doing renovation. I think putting like some sort of, man-made lake in his front yard or something. But yeah, so it seemed like they were probably over at their other mansion, which is just down the way. We drove by that place too, and there was a line of police out front. So yeah, we didn't, over the whole course of the weekend, we didn't succeed in our goal of delivering the letter to Mike McGahan, but we're fairly confident that he did receive it, and he definitely got the message.
And did you meet with any of the local organizers in Ottawa while you were there?
We did, yeah. We met with the folks from Herongate. We were a little bit late showing up to a community barbecue, but we met with some of the main organizers. And I mean, that's a struggle that we've been following for a while now, for people who are listening to this. And I guess talking to somebody from Herongate in this interview as well. But Herongate is a community in Ottawa that's facing pretty much just wholesale displacement and eviction. Most of the people who are living there at this point are Somali refugees, and they're facing, the fracturing of their community and the wholesale displacement of the entire neighborhood. So yeah, we were happy to go and meet with them. They came out to the action or to both actions. Like some of the organizers came out to the action on Friday at the CLD head office, and then came out to the one at Mike McGahan's mansion. And I mean, we're looking forward to trying to figure out ways that we can work together more in the future as well. Because, I mean, we're looking at the possibility, of linking up. There's been, growth in tenant-based struggles, and we think it would be useful to potentially look into linking them up, particularly as when we're dealing with these landlords that are, if not transnational corporations, at least, like, they operate in multiple cities. So it makes sense to have links on the tenant side as well.
So what's next for the rent strike in Hamilton?
Well, I mean, we're still focused on winning this thing, so we have a couple of other tricks up our sleeve that we're going to roll out. The AGI hearing itself, so the landlord and tenant board hearing where the actual rent increase will be decided. That's been scheduled, so it's going to be happening November 1st and 2nd. They've booked the courtroom for 2 days, anticipating that it'll be contested. So we've got basically that as one of our sort of dates coming up that will probably shape the rest of the rent strike. But from now, we're just gonna spend this next month solidifying things, getting more people on board if possible, and then continuing the attack on InterRent.
And ways people can find out more, stay in touch, support the thing, and anything else you might want to add.
People can follow us on Facebook. So it's facebook.com/Hamilton Tenants with an S, Solidarity. And then we've got a fundraiser for the Rent Strike Defense Fund, which people can go to at gofundme.com/East Hamilton Rent Strike. You can also go to our website, Hamilton Tenants Solidarity.ca, and sign up for updates and stuff like that on there.
Thanks a lot for coming back on the show, and looking forward to that victory of yours.
tacos, priced like Toronto's, like $6.99. One fish mango tacos, or bulgogi with the gluten-free chipotle coated taco shell spiced with nightclub vibe. They brought the taco, priced like Toronto, $5.99. One vegan bean rice. Then they tap the craft, it tastes crap, and that crap will tap your wallet till it run dry. I can't afford the trip, bougie smorgasborded the flight to the nightlife vibe. How nice. Who can afford the stuff, let alone the mortgage, when the rent is unaffordable for my kind of life? They brought the tacos, downtown's awful, snobs riding high-priced bikes. The Costa Taco seems to be unstoppable. City got dollar sign, First you get the artists, then you get the coffee, then you get developers in waves like zombies. Then you get the taco, then you get the condo, then you gotta go, cause it's not for you, yo. They brought the tacos, but also brought the condos. The cost of living's gotten so high. I got 50 stories of landlord whore from my folks paying frontline rental price. They brought the tacos, all the fusion nachos. Say the downtown is alive and thriving. I see the death of it, the cultural deficit. How the cost of tacos drives our demise. Got single moms versus hottest restaurant. City wanna get it all signed. They brought the dollars, inflated all the markets. They grabbed the whole 90519. So have a taco, forget about tomorrow. Fuse it with the nicest white guy spices. Have a taco, forget about tomorrow. City got dollar sign, First you get the artists, then you get the coffee, then you get developers in waves like zombies. Then you get the taco, then you get the condo, then you gotta go, cause it's not for you, yo. And then you gotta go, cause you can't afford it all. And then you gotta go, cause it's not for you, And then you gotta go, cause you can't afford it all. Then you gotta go, then you gotta go. And you know tacos are my favorite. My favorite. How you gonna take them, break them, remake them, change them into agents of gentrification? Ay, right? How you gonna try and make me hate them? The taco, the taco, the taco.
You are listening to From Embers, a weekly program of anarchist and anti-authoritarian ideas and practice across so-called Canada. We air on CFRC 101.9 FM in Kingston every Wednesday at 8 o'clock and podcast online at fromembers.libsyn.com. Before the break, you heard an interview with Jason of the Hamilton Tenants Solidarity Network about the Stoney Creek rent strike, which is now entering its 5th month. Our second interview tonight is with Mumina Igal, a member of the Herongate Tenants Coalition in Ottawa. Tenants in Herongate are currently resisting what's been dubbed the largest urban eviction campaign in Canada.
My name is Mumina Igal, and I don't live in the actual housing or area facing eviction, but I live in the neighborhood across the street. And I'm a member of the Herongate Tenants Coalition.
Great. And would you be able to start just by describing the neighborhood of Herongate a little bit?
Sure. So Herongate is made up of 3 different street names. So there's Sandalwood, Cedarwood, and Baker. And Heron as well. And so the neighborhood is made up of those 4 streets. And they come together to form Herongate. There are townhouses, apartment complexes, and co-ops in the area. It's just that's the physical makeup of the actual neighborhood. The neighborhood is extremely diverse in terms of the people living there.
And your group did a census of the neighborhood as part of your campaign. So what were some of the findings of that census?
So the census we collected was actually just of the homes facing eviction. And we collected upwards of 80% of the people that live in that area and live in the homes that are being evicted. We found that a large majority, approximately 89% of people living there are people of color. and almost half of those are of Somali descent. And so the census revealed also that there are almost upwards of 600 people that are actually facing eviction. So it's one of the largest urban evictions in Canada, therefore. The neighborhood is, like I said, upwards of 90% of people of color. And so this is a structural problem and a structural racial problem that isn't new to the city, but it's clearly exemplary of the actual structural racism that people of color face in terms of finding affordable and suitable housing.
And could you describe what is the situation there in terms of who is Timber Creek and when did they start buying up property?
So from what I understand, they bought the property about 5 years ago, I believe. And so prior to that, a couple of the owners prior to that, Minto is what most people know as originally owning the actual houses in the area. And they were, from when we speak to tenants, they were really good landlords, upkept the homes, were really good with maintenance. A couple owners down the line is when Timber Creek came into play. They don't quite keep up with repairs. They are quite nasty to their actual tenants for the most part, from what we've heard. And yeah, just are seemingly purposely neglecting repairs in the home.
Do any stories come to mind for you that really speak to what's going on and this question of deliberate neglect to kind of get people to move out of the neighborhood?
For sure. And I mean, again, I think the purposeful neglect of the housing and the condition that these houses are in needs to be something that's spoken on a little more. The fact that these houses, I don't know how that legally the city let these houses get to that level. Of course, this is a private company, and so some can argue that this doesn't have anything to do with the city. But I mean, bylaw regulations should not allow for a home to be able to get into that condition, and that's clearly a financial strategy, to buy up a home, buy up a property that is in pretty dingy condition and rent it out for a couple of years and then demolish and build new luxury homes. So yeah, I definitely think that that's something that the city could that regulatory law maybe needs to be put in place for these private landlords to not allow for this to be able to happen. But in terms of your question about stories that kind of jump out when I think about neglect, there's just a multitude of stories. I can go on for days about the fact that some folks can't even have food in their kitchen anymore because of just the number of cockroaches and the number of just insects infesting their homes, and literally cannot have food out in their kitchen, have to have all their food bagged up in garbage bags because of the cockroach and insect infestation. Some folks can't even, some folks' basements have flooded and they physically can't live in the home anymore. I met a woman who got sick because of the mold in their basement. She had mold in her basement for a year and got sick because of it. I'm going to report it to the company, and they didn't do anything about it. So yeah, I can just go on and on about different stories and different ways in which people have been affected, but it's crazy that in the nation's capital that housing could get to that degree of neglect and that degree of just destitution. It's
difficult because that deliberate, strategy of neglect creates the conditions where they can then justify demolishing the places and gentrifying the neighborhood. Given that that almost works against the eviction resistance, how are you kind of talking about both the neglect and the evictions for demolition at the same time?
The neglect was kind of a prerequisite, so to speak, for the actual evictions, I guess. And of course, clearly areas being privatized. I know you said you guys are based in Kingston, so the area has very, very rapidly gone from a low-income area to clearly moving towards a middle class area. And so, yeah, I think that the neglect and the destitution of the homes has definitely been the prerequisite for the actual evictions. And Timber Creek mentioned that the reason why these homes are even being being demolished is because of they're no longer viable. And so that's quite a ambiguous term and vague term. And in doing research, we found that basically that meant that they're no longer economically viable.
Yeah, and they demolished 80 units back in the winter of 2016. Is that right?
Yeah. So they gave out the eviction notices in late 2014, and it was 83 homes that were slated for demolition, and so they demolished them in 2015. And so currently, right now, they're building 3 quote unquote resort style apartments. From what we understood, they actually were originally slated to be condos, but I'm guessing because condos are so hot in the housing market at the moment, apartments would be much more easier to get people to rent, and so they are building 3 resort style apartments at the moment. And from what I understand, they're supposed to be for the most part 1 to 2 bedroom units. And clearly, from our census, we found that there's an average of 5.5 people in each home. And so clearly, the people that they want to rent the new apartments that they're building are not going to be their tenants that they've just evicted. And
so what happened to all the people that they evicted back in 2014, 2015?
From what I understand, most of the people who were evicted in the first round of evictions in 2014 went out and sought to find their own homes and rented in other places across the city. But some of the folks actually were moved over across the street to Timber Creek Properties, and essentially now are being told a couple of years later, just after they've settled in, that they have to move once again. And some of these folks who were actually tenants that were affected by the first round of evictions are being again moved to across the street again. And so it's almost like they're playing just a game of move and are really just inconsiderate of people's time and the money being put into like moving.
And I'm not super familiar with Ottawa, but I understand it's a pretty pricey housing market and it's getting a lot more expensive.
So actually, the city of Ottawa actually declared that we do have right now like an affordable housing crisis. So finding, number one, affordable houses in the city, especially in 4 months, is almost next to impossible. And to add on to that, finding suitable homes, again, next to impossible. So finding affordable homes and suitable homes are extremely difficult, especially in Ottawa. Seemingly like renting low-income homes are becoming less and less readily available. And so, yeah, it's been quite difficult for people to be able to find homes because of that, because of the affordable housing crisis that we're currently like in the midst of. And so I think at the moment right now, on average, you can rent like a townhouse for I think it's like $1,600 or $1,700 in the area, let alone in the city. And
what is the Herongate Tenants Coalition? Like, how did it begin and how does it work?
So one of the other members for the Herongate Tenant Coalition, Josh, actually has a separate initiative called the Hetherington Land Trust. And so I think he was having a meeting for that and already booked the space and everything. And after the May 7th announcement by Timber Creek that they were planning to demolish the homes, the meeting ended up that he was going to have for the Hetherington Land Trust ended up being a meeting about the evictions. And so a couple of us that were actually in that meeting decided to come together to form the Herongate Tenant Coalition. And from it, it's like, yeah, it's kind of taken a life of its own. It's people in the community, concerned community members, that have come together to fight these evictions, essentially.
I guess your census revealed a lot of the tenants facing eviction were Somali or Arab people. Yeah. Are there like local organizations that organize those communities that are also involved in this campaign?
Currently, at the moment, it's been quite disheartening just in general, being that a lot of the people who've reached out to us in the community support services that have reached out to us have actually not been from this community, whether that be legal, whether that be like legal clinics, whether that be housing support services. They've, like in the area, it's been pretty, like, again, passive in terms of the message and towards the support being given. We've been working with a couple, of ethnic and racial non-for-profits in terms of trying to figure out how to move forward and advocate in terms of translation work and things of that sort. But for the most part, folks have been and the organizations have been pretty passive in terms of really throwing out their support behind us. It's been a lot of individuals and folks that are not from the community helping out rather than like local organizations and local community support services.
Does it have a relationship with other groups such as Parkdale Organize and the Hamilton Tenants Solidarity Network? Like I see some of the tactics and the rhetoric and that kind of thing is similar to what's going on elsewhere in Ontario.
For sure, definitely. We've definitely, been working closely with folks, folks over the area, in similar, not exactly the same, but similar fights against landlords and, you know what I mean, things like rent price hikes and landlord licensing. We've all been kind of fighting for the same thing. And so, definitely, we've definitely learned from them and kind of been sharing notes and sharing strategies on how to kind of mobilize. And so, it's definitely been a collaborative effort on all parts to definitely kind of come together and try to figure out how to fight all that we're fighting for, because we're kind of fighting for different things, but all regarding housing. And so, it's been great to kind of be able to exchange notes and kind of really work together to mobilize.
So what is your current strategy as an organization? Like, I understand you've advised people to not move. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I mean, people have the legal right when they're being evicted to either, go ahead, move, find their own housing, and go on about their life. But they also have the legal right to actually fight the evictions. And so, we've definitely been advising folks and letting folks know both of their rights on both ends. We've been definitely doing that. Currently, right now, we're actually in the process of applying to the Human Rights Tribunal. And so that's currently what our strategy is going forward, is taking this fight to the Human Rights Tribunal. There
was a pretty disheartening editorial in the Ottawa Citizen last week, basically siding with the landlord. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like a lot of the local politicians are basically saying their hands are tied or that they can't do anything about it. It's unfortunate that the nation's capital, politicians in the city have just been quite passive and very much so, just complicit in what's going on, definitely always pointing to the fact that this is a provincial issue and this is something that we need to take up with the province, and it's not a city issue. And so, unfortunately, especially being that we're in the midst of a affordable housing crisis, that the city wouldn't be more helpful, and elected officials wouldn't be more helpful in helping to, advocate and help fight what's going on instead of just being complicit and passive. I think your group has done a really good job of documenting and sharing, who are actual people who are facing this eviction, putting a human face on that as opposed to this kind of political issue that gets debated in newspapers. It's obviously about real people and how it's affecting their lives. And I also liked how this map of neglect that you have on the website, and some of the pictures you have, the one that jumped out at me was the garden hose for the community garden that was locked to the fence.
That community garden, whenever I look at it, I'm just like, wow, because it's a garden that has a bunch of organizations and individuals that have sponsored it, but haven't upkept it. So it's a really good parallel, and you could draw that really good parallel in terms of the actual support for the neighborhood. I mean, it's very superficial in terms of what they're actually doing to actually support the neighborhood. And so that garden, whenever I look at it, it's just really symbolic of how these organizations and how these individuals who sponsored this garden really have let the neighborhood die, along with the garden that they were supposed to build.
If the legal method or the Human Rights Tribunal strategy doesn't work out in your favor, do you have additional plans to resist evictions come October or November?
Yeah, for sure. We definitely do. Currently, the primary strategy and the primary course of action is going to be the Human Rights Tribunal. But if that doesn't work out, we have things set in place and second and third strategies that we're going to definitely implement.
And if people want to find out more about the Herongate Tenants Coalition or the campaign or support the campaign, where can we do that?
So you can reach us on all social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. If you want to email us about an inquiry, you can email us at herongatetc@gmail.com. And we currently right now have a GoFundMe for a community legal defense fund. So you can check that out, and that's in our Twitter bio as well as our Facebook. It's pinned on our Facebook page.
This has been an episode of From Embers, a weekly program of anarchist and anti-authoritarian ideas and practice across so-called Canada. We air on CFRC 101.9 FM in Kingston every Wednesday at 8 o'clock and podcast online at fromembers.libsyn.com. All the music tonight has been by Lee Reed, who actually just released an EP to fundraise for the Hamilton Tenants Solidarity Network. Pick up a copy at htsn.bandcamp.com. We'll see you next week.
I kinda feel like a ghost now, just a remnant of the old town, the downtown, your condo tower ground. I don't recognize the sights or sound of it. Spot closed down, my peeps pushed out of it. They proud though, this whole young money crowd, yo. They get the keys to mom and dad's accounts, yo. Over half these hip businesses, just daddy's little princess, loan with no interest, no risk. Some moms that get evicted, some moms help the kids to open businesses. Business, your home where you live is made pawn in the system. Profits insistent, insta picture. The city's still living. Hold out renters with OG billing. We chillin', but life support's failing. The condo sickness looks contagious, and the mortgage housing corporation stated our real estate rates are dangerously out of place with the state of our reality, not keeping pace with wage and salary. The new place, the gold flake pancakes, a couple blocks from a food bank, moving into communities like a tank. A phalanx, a soldier, no knocking homes. Take notice of the eviction notices. Notice the motive when the city don't notice that, or been promoting in the interest of ownership. Steady stroking, developer bonus. It's your home versus investor voter, yo. Market forces are all unaffordable. Oh, you can do anything in Hamilton with a couple mil and some property management shit sandwich. The city two-handing it, Ectel planner taking advantage and fanning the flames of displacement with no plan in place to face it. Not a trace, they fake hot. Lot of hashtag ham on. Not enough love for the ham knots. Am I right? There'll be nice new light rail transit for the folks that can afford the extravagance. Avalanching, advancing capital, expanding. The city need a bandaging. Stem the hemorrhaging, cost of living in shit condition. Threats of eviction, fist lifted, spirit of 46 shit. Stop displacement, stop evictions, stop using the fucking homes as investment. Kindly get your hands off our necks, man. Fist lifted, spirit of 46. Stop displacement, stop evictions, stop using the fucking homes as investment. Kindly get your hands off our necks, man.
My name is Ikram Dahir, and I've been a resident in this area for 27 years. Since I came here, I was 1 year old when I moved here, and it's very sad to see what's happening in this community right now, to take a whole community and just spread them around. Some people can't afford homes outside of this community. There's people who don't speak English. There's people who don't know what's happening, and you're going to take them out of where they feel comfortable and move them elsewhere where they can't even knock on a neighbor's door and ask for help. Like, I'm very upset about this, and it's just not fair, and you're causing people stress, anxiety. Like, this is not right. This needs to be stopped, and we will stop Timber Creek. No matter what it takes, we will stop. This is where I grew up, and I will not take a no for an answer. I'm not moving. You need to understand that, Timber Creek. I will not move. My grandma, she's 90 years old, and she cannot move a second time. Second time eviction. Do you hear what I'm saying, Timber Creek? Everyone in the community needs to get together and stand against Timber Creek.
KiteLine is a weekly 30-minute radio program focusing on issues in the prison system. You'll hear news along with stories from prisoners and former prisoners as well as their loved ones. You'll learn what prison is, how it functions, and how it impacts all of us.
Behind the prison walls, a message is called a kite. Whispered words, a note passed hand to hand, a request submitted to the guards for medical care. Illicit or not, sending a kite means trusting that other people will bear it farther along until it reaches its destination. Here on KiteLine, we hope to share these words across the prison walls.
You can hear us on the Channel Zero network and find out more at kitelineradio.noblogs.org.